Everybody can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everybody, and thanks, Donna, for that lead-in. It's a perfect lead-in to what we're going to discuss today, and what I'm going to discuss is approaching an inspection and risk assessment, and basically they're synonymous within the rule because an inspection is basically a risk assessment of your agricultural water sources. So with that, we'll get into the meat of it here. Under the rule, and I'm paraphrasing the rule here, these are specific codified language within the rule, these bullet points for things that are expected of you during an annual inspection. And what they say is you should inspect your agricultural system at least annually. Now that's the minimum. And so throughout this presentation, we'll be discussing things that you can do on the ground and things that if something changes, they need to be re-inspected. So that's why the language is in there for at least annually. And some of those things are identifying potential hazards, and by hazards we mean microbial hazards related to your agricultural water system. That system from where you take the water to where it's applied to covered produce. And it also is to the extent under your control of your agricultural water source. So what they don't expect you to do is to drive up your irrigation canal and look at other turnouts for problems or other delivery systems. You want to look at your specific delivery if you have a canal or a well and inspect those each year or at least annually. Also, they want you to look at the degree of protection. So how am I protecting that source from potential hazards? And these are the two common elements of what we're talking about. So adjacent, they want you to look at adjacent or nearby land uses. So what's going on around you, not just at your turnout or at where you're taking the water. They want you to be aware of potential hazards that probably are way further out. So we'll talk about how that can be accomplished here. And what specifically you're looking for is a likelihood of an introduction of a known or reasonably foreseeable hazard to your agricultural water by another user of agricultural water before it reaches your farm. So now that's kind of confusing because you're not supposed to be looking upstream too far, but they expect you to do a little bit of that. Then specifically, it's all of your agricultural water systems to the extent they're under your control, including your sources, distribution systems, facilities, and equipment. Now we're going to specifically talk about sources, your source water, and your distribution systems. Now, what are these degrees of protection? Well, one of those is backflow prevention. I'm living in the South now, and there's not a lot of backflow preventers on irrigation wells. And I've been recommending, at least to growers that I work with, that's the minimum you should be doing. And we've learned that through FDA outbreak investigation courses. This is one of the number one things they look for are backflow preventers on your piped irrigation systems. Also, looking for leaking pipes and valves throughout the distribution system. These are pretty simple to identify because one, if it is leaking, then you can have outgrowth from microbial communities in and around your well. And we'll talk about a little bit of this with respect to the field and how it can be a potential hazard. Also, locations of possible contamination. So if you get positive tests or you see turbidity, excess turbidity, things like that, you'll want to look for those locations and look around your distribution system for things that could be infiltrating your water system. This is a big one, standing water and swales. So it's not intuitive that if you're driving down a farm road and water is splashing onto the crop, that's a problem, because these are disturbed constantly by moving vehicles or whatever is going through the road, or down the down your furrows or something like that, because turbidity is a big problem. Turbidity equals bacteria. It's much more contaminated than the overlying water. So the more it's disturbed, the more you can kick up more bacteria. So you'll want to mitigate these the standing water or swales in the road that can hold water. And really just going through your whole distribution system and looking for problems and making sure that it's functioning properly throughout from where you take the water to where it's applied. And again, as Donna mentioned, they're encouraging at least that without all of subpart E, some of that being pulled back, and the FDA is looking at that, they want you to start inspections now. You should be. And some of your bio requirements are doing that. So if you're doing that, you should write it down, at least for this at this point. So one of the first things we suggest that growers do is map out your distribution system and have a farm map. This is Russell Ranch outside of UC Davis. It's a research farm, and it took me about 10 minutes to map out this, or 10 to 15 minutes to map this out. Not that everything's true, of course. Tomatoes and cucumbers probably don't grow on the same block, but you get the story here. And you can, and so if you see problems, you can circle those problems and really go through your inspection forms and say that those, or at least let them know that you've looked at it and you've mitigated that risk, or you've done something about it. But this is the first thing you should do, is map out your farm. Now, we'll say that when you do these inspections, the only thing that is really required is that, or at least that's written down besides what the fix is that you've initialed it and you've dated it, so, or you've signed it, so that they know who is actually performing these inspections. Some of the other things needed during these annual assessments is that you document for each growing season. So at the start of each growing season, you look at your distribution system and you have that written down. And by the way, get yourself a 3-ring binder. You're going to need them for the requirements under the produce safety rule. And so, in any maintenance that you've done, and maintenance is included, is a part of the inspection. They consider that maintenance. You inspected it, that's considered maintenance under the rule. So that you document that at least annually. And then any major changes to your water distribution system should trigger a new inspection at this point, i.e. that you went from your canal source to a reservoir or a pond source of water, or any type of interchanging of that. That should be documented and written down. So I can really geek out on backflow prevention because I've got my manual here. This is from USC. It's a massive manual on backflow prevention and cross connections. It's what some of these FDA folks will actually read and get control by. It's a whole course, about 6-week course, and costs lots of money to do it. But for you guys, it's pretty simple. What is and what is not backflow prevention? These are devices that are not considered backflow prevention by the FDA. So you can see that if you're using a spigot with a globe valve on it, it can fail. I mean, you've all done it, right? You have spigots at home, you've opened them up, or you have them on your farm, and they fail constantly. You have to replace them. Well, they can if they break, or that seal is broken, that ball valve, while it's not open, is broken, you can pull water back into your distribution, back into your source water, whether that's your canal or your well. And now, an inline check valve, a check valve is considered backflow prevention for certain things, but with respect to water quality, it's not, because it's only a single, and I'll show you that here. These are considered backflow preventers. This dual check valve, when I was talking about the single check valve, well, it has a dual check valve. So it has 2 check valves. One fails, you have the other one as backup. And these vacuum breakers, any change in pressure will cause it to trigger. and prevent backflow. Some of you guys, if you're using standpipes, like the one pictured here on the right, you want at least enough gap that pipe isn't in the water, or it can be, the water level can rise to the level of the pipe. You want to make sure that you have as much gap as you can there. So again, leaks, you want to look around your ranch or farm for leaks around your distribution system, especially around your source water, because as you see here, not only is it eroding away under the casing or under the slab, it's also creating biofilm, which they can harbor all types of things. If you have staff out there, or you're doing it yourself, and you're starting the year out, and you open up your distribution system for the first time, you know this, you've seen it. Black water pours out, or this, in this case, in the middle here, the flushing of and this is purple valve water. This is recycled water. So it's pouring out, last year's standing water in there. So you want to at least do a minimum of flushing before you start using that water on crop. And your filters, whether they're sand filters or like this, the barrel mesh filter, or even with sand and these mesh filters, you want to make sure that they're clean, or they're maintained properly. And in this case, this is done by an irrigation district. They pull the barrel out, they clean it once a month, and it's still, you see how much buildup, and that's a month's worth of buildup. If you have too much, 2 months, 3 months, it's a problem. So you just want to make sure that these are maintained properly. So the FDA has written in the rules certain practices and types of irrigation are less risky than others. Donna just talked about it. What's less risky or risky than others? And one of these is this drip irrigation field. This is a great example of, well, the water doesn't come in contact with my crop, so why do I have to care about it? Well, problems like this, if you're not actively inspecting your distribution system, these problems can happen. And as you see, that splash right there on the picture on the right is actually touching all the crop around that. And those are little, it's a lettuce field, so it's contacting everything, and all that dirt and debris is all hitting those crops. So they're adulterated. So you have to, when you go through there, you say, hey, we had a leak, we fixed it. Everything's good, right? So for those things. We did an experiment, and Dr. Harris did a similar experiment where we took, not to badmouth Tootsie Rolls, but we took a fecal size Tootsie Roll, or I'm sorry, Tootsie Roll size fecal roll, and we spiked in E. coli 0157, and then we let irrigation occur over 2 hours. And what we found is that over that period, the amount of splash that occurs will contaminate, can contaminate up to 2 feet away from that, that sort of Tootsie Roll. In the second experiment, we did a second experiment, I think it was up to 4 feet away. So it splashes pretty well, especially when you have the furrows filling up with water in those things and being able to flow. Not that it's a bad thing, but mitigating that can help a little bit. So with respect to wells, wells are pretty complicated systems in and of themselves. On the left here, you see that this is a very intact well. It's housed, it's well cared after. And so there are no problems here. But if you see, the casing is cracked, your sanitary seal, there is no sanitary seal, or you have a regular seal on top of theirs, you'll wanna inspect that. If they're bad, you want to replace them. And you also want to know something about your well when you're doing your inspections. You want to know how deep it is, because that actually is considered a way to calculate how long you need to flush it to get everything out of the casing first, and to be able to get to the groundwater you want applied to crops. Also, again, backflow prevention is a big one. And right here, that's a dual check valve. It doesn't look like one, but it is. It's a dual check valve in line there. So they have a way, this is a way of protecting your well from being contaminated. And also, you know, as mentioned in the PSA trainings, is you kind of want it sloped away from where, if there is water or if there is a leak, the water will run down, run away. And you don't want these downs, if you have them, you don't want them downstream of any animal operations, or if you have domestic animals or things like that, you want to keep them out of there, keep them away. So canals, I've tested tons of canals on the West Coast, up and down the Central Valley, and then up in Washington State. And the one thing we recommend is that these are both intake, so these are two turnouts, different types. One has a mesh filter on it, or at least a mesh filter to keep some of the debris out, and then the other one is a barrel mesh that door opens up and pulls that water out. Just keep those clean and free of debris. Now, irrigation districts do a pretty good job of trying to mitigate the algal growth, and they'll pop in some copper sulfate and let it run down. That does a fairly good job. However, you'll want to, your own source, where you're taking that water, you'll want to just take a look. If it's got that on there, brush it off, send it down the canal, and just to mitigate that risk a little bit. Just keeping it clear of debris and garbage is good. Speaking of debris, this is an algal mat I found sitting by a bridge. The water's actually flowing underneath it, but the blue, I guess, stuff on top is copper sulfate. So it kind of did its job. It released it. However, it released it into one area. So if you're the grower there, and this was a turnout here, if you're the grower there, you're going to want to do something about that, or at least call the irrigation district and have them do it. They will be happy to come out there and help you out. On most websites, on most of the irrigation websites, if they have one, irrigation districts, and especially with canals, they have maintenance records that are going, or at least they let you know if they're going to be doing anything significant. Now, this was an accident. There was a tree that fell through and it created a turbidity plume that came through. They came out and in 20 minutes got it cleared away, and then the grower continued pulling water. Another potential hazard that is not, most growers aren't aware of, are sewage. The picture on the far right is a simulation. We did a dye tracer simulation of sewage. That's about 5 gallons a minute right there going into the canal. It's a very large trunk canal. It's a 90-mile canal. But if you see that little blue area underneath the bridge there, that's a sewage. That's a reflection of the sewage pipe. It had ruptured the previous season, and no one knew how long it had been ruptured. It had been pouring sewage into the canal, and growers downstream were taking that water. Now, that's a risk that is there and the potential, but you need to be aware of these things, that these are potential things that are, because utilities fall under bridges. That's just the nature of it. So, and they can weaken. We have a very weak infrastructure system, so they can weaken and rupture and pour sewage into canals. So that's just something that you should be made aware of. Now, the idea of adjacent and nearby land uses, if you have active cattle loafing in canal systems, that's a problem. And it's something that you can contact your irrigation district about, and that's something you should be writing down in your inspection, is that I can't do anything about it. I've tried to do something about it. And of course, testing helps with that too, testing your water to see if that is a problem. But that's something that can be, that should be down in your annual inspection, as well as any potential wildlife to your canal system. So this is a large deposit right there on the side of the canal. And obviously they're watering there for some reason, maybe in the evening or something like that. But That's just something you can write down. You may not be able to do anything about it immediately, like xeriscaping or something like that, but you definitely want to write it down that that's occurring. This was a small, I guess, lateral canal off a main canal, and I couldn't figure out. I was sampling downstream of this site here. I couldn't figure out why the indicator levels were, elevated, because it was generally pretty clean, but even in this earthen canal. But I walked up at one point. I looked at that telephone line or that power line going over it, and saw a poop trail, like all these bird droppings, and it went all the way across. Honestly, and it all the way over to the other pole there. So I notified the grower, and I said, "This is a problem." So he put in air cannons closer to the this site, and it actually improved water quality. They stopped roosting there as much. I mean, they get used to it, honestly, but yeah, it helped to do that, and it got rid of that poop trail too. So this is another, and when we're talking about irrigation reservoirs or ponds, there are certain things that you want to note, and I illustrated it here rather than having a long list of things that you should note. But these are some of the things, like how far am I away from potential contamination? That's a dairy in the background there, and they're stacking manure right near that fence line. So you'll want to note that in your annual inspection. Also, is there any buffer? Well, there's distance. That's a certain type of buffer, and this pond wasn't burned by any stretch. So any airflow coming over from that dairy could potentially get into this pond. You also want to note if it's lined. Do you line the pond, or is it just natural, just a natural hole in the ground? And then note that you have the potential for debris around your intake. Well, you want to keep that clear, and that you've done that. And if you're actually treating the pond, are you following the label? Just like in the PSA training, they tell you just follow the label. If you're doing everything in the label, it's all good. With that, again, with that was adjacent. Now we're talking about nearby. In nearby, you have to get some perspective. So if you're drawing water from this canal on the left, this is a good vantage point to see what's going on upstream. If you're down over there taking it, and you can note things that are going on. Now, some people don't have this luxury or some growers don't have this luxury of getting this perspective, but you can with maps and certain things, certain mapping programs. You can look, like Google Earth. You can look around your ranch or farm and look for things that are potential hazard, like here. Now, again, here's an example of a place where we sampled. We sampled this canal, and then there's a pond to the north of that, those two stars there. When you're talking about adjacent, you're talking about very narrow areas adjacent. So I'm going to walk, that's probably a quarter mile upstream from the canal, and basically a 360-degree view looking around the pond. But when you're talking about nearby, it covers a whole lot of area. So having a view like this, you can look for things. And frankly, there's, other growers around you, and there's also some unimproved lands and also there. That's it. And that's what they expect you to really take into account when you're doing your annual inspection. This was a part of the study. We looked at flowing water past a dairy as a canal. This is a main trunk line of a canal, and we looked at, does water quality degrade as you go past a dairy? So water's flowing this way, and we always have this. What do you think? As a questionnaire, you guys can't answer this, but well, it does. It does degrade. It does degrade. And so we asked the same question. Well, what about if you have wind? That was water. Now we're talking about wind to these upper levels here. These this is off the main trunk line. The blue line is a lateral canal up to the north, smaller canal, very slow moving water. Will it affect the water quality? Well, it does. So as WA69 all the way to W70, yeah, it jumps up pretty significantly. So those are the things you want to be looking at. That's why we say look at a nearby, look at a pretty good perspective around your water source to get a perspective of what's going on around you. Now, let's review the reasonably foreseeable things and some of the other kind of things that you may see out there, and that's confluences. This is a river that some draw out of, especially the irrigation districts. Well, there's a massive sediment plume coming from a confluence that hits it. Well, that's something that you may not be aware of, especially if you're way downstream. But if you see change in water quality, this may be something you need to be looking at. Again, wildlife, if they're intruding into your source, you'll want to note it. And if you can do something about it, that's great. If you can't, then at least it's noted, and that you're testing the water, so you're making sure that everything's good. Turbidity, again, is your enemy. We see that with everything. That's the number one thing that pops out with our water quality studies, is that higher in turbidity, and Don can tell you this probably better than I can, but turbidity is your enemy in water. So if this is happening, then the irrigation district can maybe slow down the water and or do something else that they can tamp down this turbidity. High concentrations of wildlife are a problem. I won't say they're the highest problem, but they can be, and the potential to be. So if you're seeing that, there may be other things going on than what you know. So getting a perspective again on what's going on is a good idea. I can't reiterate this enough. Standing water can be a problem if it can touch the harvestable portion of the crop, potentially, right? So you'll want to mitigate those risks by maybe grading the road a little better, or cleaning up around the well, especially around your well, or where you're taking your water. Even if you're taking water from a canal and you have a piped turnout, you'll definitely want to keep water away from those. Now Linda has our annual inspection form. It's way broader, way more intense than the PSA one, but it was made to do that. And we have it as a PDF that you can just click. If you have a phone that can pull up PDFs, you can click it. You don't really need to write anything down except for who you are and the date for those things. GPS not that important right there. And that's it.